Okay, let's talk biomems. How many people have actually used a biosensor here? Anybody? Yeah? Couple? I bet you more people have used one than you think, especially given what we've all been through the last couple of years. My first experience was back in 2010, and I remember the day distinctly because that was the day my husband and I found out that we were going to be parents. Yep, I took a home pregnancy test. That little ingenious piece of technology was actually the very first biosensor to ever be made available for over-the-counter purchase. It was commercialized in 1988 under the brand Clear Blue, and it still holds a place in the market today, along with glucose monitoring and now a whole bunch of COVID-19 tests. So we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about this really meaty topic, but before I do, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Valley Microdevices and the work that we're doing in this space. So we are what's considered a pure play MEMS foundry. We work with a lot of different types of customers, and what makes us different and a little bit unique is that we start working with our customers early on in the product development cycle. So we support them all the way through their development and into pilot production. And because of where we sit in the ecosystem, we've had the opportunity to work on some really interesting projects over the years. You can see here molecular diagnostics, glucose monitoring systems, a lot of lab-on-chip type of applications. We work with a company that's located right here in San Diego that's working on a graphene-enabled biosensor, and that is now turned into a platform, so that's going to be really incredible. We're actually working with the University of California right now. There's a team in San Francisco that is building the first bioartificial kidney. So you can see, even for a fab that's smaller like ours, we're getting a really amazing cross-section of all this technology that's being developed. There's a lot going on. And it's happening all at the same time that our healthcare system is really struggling, even at the global level. And you can see, even in these numbers, we are spending a lot of money. Here in the US, we're spending 16.9% of our GDP on healthcare. That is over $10,000 for every man, woman, and child living in this country. Our systems are struggling. We've got high demand. We've got an aging population. We have a workforce participation issue right now, especially in healthcare. And that spending number is before COVID-19. This is from 2018. And so I think it's pretty clear from some of these numbers that we are in need of some systems change. We need to work on better outcomes, better accessibility, and doing it at a reasonable cost, because this is not sustainable. And I think technology is going to play a really big role in moving from what I consider a pretty provider-centric care system to a much more patient care-centric system. And so what I mean by patient-centric is, we have got to take a look at what the individual person needs and using technology to connect more with them to increase outcomes and build in efficiency into that system. We are collecting a lot of data. We even talked about this earlier in the day, how much data we're collecting on ourselves, daily vitals, exercise data. Much of this is actually slated for the medical industry, but they're going health first because it's easier to get these devices into the market. But the point of this is that if we use this data to actually connect up all of those things that we know about our own bodies and are able to create a secure platform to this that you could give access to your provider, and then you combine that with some of the tools that are being developed now, diagnostics, you've got continuous monitoring, drug delivery, and a lot of other technology. Now you've got a way to really deliver on the promise of accessibility and do it at a cost level that's reasonable. And I think for looking at this sort of system, it starts to take place really at the primary care level. So this is the way you interact with your family doctor. We need to start empowering people with rapid results. Those pre-screening and early detection, if we were to capture the power of all that data, you can do predictive analytics around this and use AI to determine when you should be screening for these things, cancer, autoimmune disease, genetic disorders. And then I think, based on the data and the wide adoption of doing COVID-19 tests at home, that there's a real appetite for that. People know how to use these tests, and they will do it at home if given that opportunity. I have kids. Anybody got kids? Young kids? Yeah. Do you want to take your 5-year-old that is coughing, got a fever, is struggling, wrap them up in their pajamas, and try to get them to the pediatrician to find out if they have strep throat? Why should you, right, when you potentially could have this technology right at home? Run to the drugstore, pick up a small device, be able to test them, and know, are they still contagious? How long are they going to be sick for, potentially? Should I send my kid to school? Should I stay home, right? How vulnerable am I? And then if there's medication needed, what does that look like? How do I communicate with my doctor, and do I even need to go into an office to get that care? And I would say no. And we're going to see less and less of that need coming up here pretty soon. I wanted to point out this particular kit. This is something that you can buy at Best Buy for $299. It is designed for telehealth. It has everything you need in order to do a self-examination and then give that data to your medical professional on the other side of the screen. What it doesn't have yet is the power of biosensors, so it's not there yet. These technologies that I'm going to be talking about, a lot of them are pre-commercialization, but they're coming. So you've got the primary care piece, right? We can drive efficiency in there. We use technology to do that. And then there's the biosensor enhanced treatment piece. And this is a really big deal. We've already starting to see a lot of movement in this market. You think diabetes care, right? There are people doing development now on analyzing electrolytes and what that tells us about the body. Hormone monitoring. 5 years ago, this would have been unheard of, right? People are starting to do development on devices using microneedles and other types of technology to be able to do continuous monitoring of what is happening with our bodies on the hormonal side. You think fertility and many, many other functions of the body are determined by hormones, so really exciting. And that gives us the ability to do sort of this, this closed-loop drug delivery systems. There's personalized medicine and immunotherapy that's involved with this. It's pretty incredible, the potential of this type of technology. One thing I'd like to point out, too, on the continuous monitoring, we've got an issue with antibiotics being overused, mostly in the animal population, right? Think farming. If you've read anything about this, now, human population is now becoming less and less responsive to antibiotics. There is a small group that is developing a microneedle patch that will actually be able to measure real-time B-lactins, which is your body's response to antibiotics. So you can take less and still get the same response, depending on what your weight is and what your size is and what you're actually what infection you're trying to fight. So, lots and lots of opportunities now, but if you look at the revenue that is associated with some of these technologies, it's doubled because of COVID-19, right? This was sort of even just our test case with getting biosensors onto the market in this way. And I think it really just proves that people want this technology, and we've got to try to deliver on that. And you can see it's showing up here in percentages. Most of this market is still diabetes. You have some fertility, cardiovascular, infectious disease, right? That orange piece is the COVID sort of phenomenon that we just see, the impact of COVID-19. But it's coming. And I think there's an enormous opportunity here. And as innovators, we need to talk a little bit more about what do we need to know here in order to enter into this market and support the development of this technology, because it really has the potential to change and improve lives all over the world. So, One message I want to make sure everybody gets is that biosensors are already part of our industry, right? They're part of the MEMS and sensor industry. I know it's early for many people that are looking at this technology, but it's coming, and it's time to start really paying attention. I think building core competency is really important in some of these, and then looking at business challenges, and we're going to kind of explore a little bit more of that. But we've got to work a little bit to learn the language. I can tell you, as a small fab that's working with some of these companies, that language barrier has been very interesting. So there's nothing like having a customer visit, and you got 6, 7 people sitting in your conference room, and you go to start to talk about their project, and they're using language you've never heard of before, right? And you have to sort of step back and go, okay, this is something we refer to as a channel, and this is what you're calling like, a depression or whatever it is. But it expands to wider than that. So I wanted to kind of put up some language here. These are like, there's 5 terms here. There's hundreds of these to get familiar with if you're going to work on biomems. So I'll start with just the analyte, right? That's the substance you're measuring for. What are you making the sensor to sense? That's what everybody is referring to as the analyte. In a COVID-19 test, the lateral flow test, which is called the antigen test, is that like quick, the one you have in your bathroom. The analyte is actually the antigen, which is the part that irritates your immune system. That's what you're looking for. That's what you want to bind to. The bioreceptor part in that test is actually the antibody. And so when those two things, if you have COVID and that test comes into, the antibodies that are sitting on the surface of that test comes into contact with the protein, then you have biorecognition, and that's when you actually get a test result, right? And most biosensors fall into a few categories. They're electrochemical, optical, they can be mechanical. In the case of COVID-19, it's an immuno type of sensor. And you can see, you have your analytes, you have your biorecognition elements, and then you bring them together, and if you have a positive test, you get a signal, and you can turn it into something that's actually measurable. So in some ways, you're looking at this integration of biotechnology and microtechnology, and building one system out of it. So when you're looking at this from a manufacturing perspective, there's some pretty big challenges to tackle here, and differences when we're looking at a device that's going to come into contact with some sort of biomaterial, especially if it's going in the body. There are certain things, certain tools that we use in MEMS manufacturing that is an absolute no-no, and one of them is material that is not biocompatible. An example of that is HMDS. Everybody knows HMDS. It's an adhesion promoter for photoresist. Can't use it. So how do you get your photoresist to stick? Those are sort of the practical things that manufacturers have to think about when you're talking about making a biosensor. There's a lot of new materials that people are starting to use as well. Working with metallic nanoparticles. We've got gold and zinc oxide and platinum particles that people are working on. In fact, if you remember a few years back, Elisa Fitzgerald, you did a presentation on new sensors that were coming on board, and you talked about paper sensors. I found one, and it works. It's paper covered in silver nanoparticles. It's a capacitive sensor. And I got to actually, turn the light on and off. Very, very cool. It's used for they're using it for eye tracking applications right now. It's a startup company. And I found it at a conference, a venture capital conference in, I think it was Philadelphia, a couple of weeks ago. So very cool. Carbon-based nanoparticles, that's a whole, nanomaterials, that's a whole nother area. Graphene, I mentioned that we're working with a company that's using graphene. When we first ran into this material, we didn't know how it would interact with other parts of the fab and other materials we're using. Turns out it's not that hard to work with. But there's other sort of carbon nanotubes, and fibers and things like that people are using, and then polymers, right? Non-conductive and conductive polymers that are being used. The other piece of this, we'll talk about packaging is a complicated thing for all of us, right? Not just biosensors, but testing a biosensor device, how do you do it? How do you know that as a manufacturer you are delivering known good die? It was a question that we had to ask our customers, and you know what? Some of them couldn't answer it. They don't know. Until you go, because these are single-use types of sensors, in a lot of cases, you don't know if it works or not until you actually try it. So it's a technical challenge that we all have to try to figure out how to solve. The packaging, of course, is complex. Like I said, it's complex for us, and it's even more complex for biosensors. In some cases, the bioreceptor piece of that device is actually real material that's encapsulated, and that has to be stable for a minimum of 6 months, so it has to have a shelf life. So doing the research and the development for some of these devices can be quite involved, as I'm sure you realize. And then you look at really the business challenges. So something that's important to remember for some of these things, we think we have a supply chain that's pretty challenged in our industry. Try to get the same type of nanoparticle consistently over and over and over again. Good luck, right? If that is integral to the way your device functions, you might have some really big challenges. And so it's really important to start looking at how to properly develop that supply chain and make sure that you're getting consistent quality, that it's repeatable, especially if you're trying to commercialize a device. Even on the graphene side, which is graphene's been around for a long time, there's still challenges in getting material that is consistent and repeatable to make these devices from. The other piece is the regulatory system. So people think of regulatory system as mainly FDA and other things, but it is really important to think about legislation around how these devices are being used. Because I'll tell you what, if you are working on a new device that you cannot get Medicaid or Medicare to reimburse for, that's it, you don't have a business. And so it's something that these companies are really struggling with. It can be a really big issue when you talk about early adoption, which is sometimes why we see some of this technology heading to the health side, health and wellness side, as opposed to the med tech side. It's because they can bypass some of that. But what we're not getting is that aggregation of data that's really important in making sure that we can actually streamline healthcare delivery systems and understand better how the body works. And venture capital. So we know that even on the MEMS side and semiconductor side, it can take a really long time to get a particular technology commercialized. On the biosensor side, we're talking a timeline that's a lot closer to what you see for pharmaceuticals. So that pharmaceutical drug, whatever it might be, could be in development for 20 years. We've had biosensors that have been, people have been working on for 50 years, and we're now just getting to the point where they're ready for commercialization. And so the venture capital, people are in some ways struggling with that because most of the companies that are pharma companies are enormous, right? Now we've got all this emerging technology coming on board, and how do we pay for the rest of the development? How do we pay for the commercialization and actually get it to the rest of the way? So, but what I will tell you is on the healthcare side, the money is already getting out there. So we saw some market volatility, especially this morning in semiconductor. This money is already in the pipeline. It's already been dispersed. This is all of healthcare. Right, but biosensors and MEMS, biomems are included in this enormous number. So there is money out there, and it's important that us collectively, that we figure out how to work with the bio community, just like we did with automotive, to actually make the best use out of this money that's already there. So, lots and lots of stuff to think about. My thoughts for you, and what I think makes the most sense, because some of this is early, is talking about how do you prepare your company to sort of enter the biosensor market if that's what you want to do. What are some of the things you can start to do now, right? You can assess your team. Find out who's interested in biosensors. Hire a bioengineer and teach them MEMS. We did it. It was awesome. We have a great team, and they're doing really well. Go to a med tech conference. Go and talk and listen to a medical doctor talk about how they're using new technology with their patients. It's fascinating, and I think you'll get a lot out of it. Work with a startup. Explore new materials like graphene. And then, connect with your research institutions. There's a ton of things going on there. I know it's early, but it's worth taking a good look at and building that relationship. So with that, I will say thank you. I know we've got other presentations, but I'll stick around for any questions that you might have later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Okay, we do have time for a couple of questions, so I'll welcome the audience to come up. Or maybe a question for me, Jessica. You've seen a number of ideas transition from ideas to prototypes to manufacturing. Is there some advice that you give over and over that now you're giving to the biomems market?
I would say for us, we try very hard not to pick winners and losers, because we know that in our company we don't know enough about this technology to really determine whether it's going to be successful or not. And the things that we thought were really super far-fetched have been the ones that have been successful. So I would say if you're working with a startup, if you're working on biomems, give the technology a shot. There are definitely ones out there that are worth working on.
Thank you.
As an industry, what can we do to address the privacy concerns? Because the data that's being generated is extremely personal and can be used for nefarious reasons. If you look at the presentations previously, for instance, monitoring forest fires, it's clear insurance companies would have a vested interest in trying to prevent physical damage, which is a great thing.
Yep.
But on the other side of the coin, you can easily see premiums being adjusted based on data extracted from sensors. You might find information that you don't want to know. If it's not treatable, why do you want to know you have a disease? So what can we do to address those concerns?
I think they're really, really great questions, both philosophical and practical questions about how we manage that. I think the key to this and to working with the data is really to empower the individual and make sure that we're protecting it. We have tools like blockchain and things like that we can make data secure with, but it's really about empowering that person whose the data is being collected about. So if it's your body, you should have the say about whether or not you are allowing your medical professional to actually view that data and use that data. Although, there's definitely some benefits to taking a look at aggregate data and using that in sort of in a way that that keeps anonymity of the sort of person that it's coming from. It's something that we're going to have to deal with, and it will probably be dealt with at the legislative level.
I can answer the data.
You can, good.
It's a great question. So what we are doing at DRIDE in terms of the data, we are collecting enormous data across the globe. Be it Spain, be it Indonesia, we are collecting data. However, the good news is we are riding on AWS. Now, AWS has their instances in each country, so the data is not leaving the country. So that way, we are making sure the policymakers are happy. And look, data can be used for good reasons too. So we are being very positive about using the data for the right reasons, not for bad reasons. And with the inferences and with machine learning models, we can do a lot of things, what we just saw at what Meta is doing, for example.
Yeah, I think there's so much benefit. And the reality is that we're giving our data away right now, probably as we sit here. We have apps that we're putting in our dietary information. We're tracking our steps. That data is going somewhere. And I think that we have not begun to really harness that from a health perspective quite yet. And I think it will have a big impact on how we deliver care and the effectiveness and accessibility to care.
Well, thanks again, and early congrats on the
Thank you.
upcoming 20 years of
Yes,
Valley
thank
next
you.
year.